Since the first year of his first term in office, he has wanted a parade. And not just a normal parade, he wants a military parade. After Trump in his first term saw a military parade in France for Bastille Day, he said he wanted to top that. He said he wanted something bigger than that, something more like the gigantic Death Star military parades held by countries like China and Russia and North Korea. Specifically, Trump wanted tanks. He wanted tanks upon tanks rolling down the boulevards of Washington, D.C. The issue with tanks, though, is that they weigh a ton. To be more exact, American tanks weigh like 30 to 70 tons, more or less, depending on the model, which is way too heavy to roll down the streets of Washington, D.C. without destroying the streets of Washington, D.C. So in his first term, Donald Trump did not get his military parade with tanks. But he did get a consolation prize. Halfway through his first term, on the 4th of July in 2019, he held what he called a salute to America in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Basically, he gave a speech, a stationary speech, and he did have tanks, but they were not tanks rolling by, they were also stationary tanks. In fact, the closest thing to a parade that day was the convoy that was required to get the tanks into position, because the tanks had to be carried toward the memorial on semi-trucks and then carefully rolled off the trucks onto a series of strategically placed wooden planks where they put them on little platforms so they wouldn't break anything. That was it. Tanks on semi-trucks and then on little plinths. That was it. His whole first term, Trump never got the big military parade he wanted. Now, of course, he's trying again. The Army now says it is planning a military parade complete with more than 6,000 soldiers and, you guessed it, tanks. It is still unclear if those tanks will be rolling or stationary or on the back of semi-trucks maybe, but the whole spectacle is set for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army, which also happens to be the president's own birthday, June 14th. And if that news makes you want to be somewhere, anywhere else, take heart. Something else is happening that day. At more than 100 locations around the country thus far, I have a feeling there's going to be more than that. A coalition of groups, including Indivisible and Social Security Works and 5051, they are all organizing a nationwide day of protest for June 14th. They're calling it No King's Day. As they put it on their website, quote, Donald Trump wants tanks in the street and a made-for-TV display of dominance for his birthday, a spectacle meant to look like strength. But real power isn't staged in Washington. It rises up everywhere else. Joining us now is Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Ezra, it's nice to see you this evening. Thanks very much for making time.
Great to see you, Rachel.
So we've spent a lot of time covering sort of the character and the effect of protests of all kinds around the country. A lot of those organized through Indivisible, a lot of them organized through 5051 and other groups. What is the basic idea, the specific idea, I guess, around June 14th?
Look, Donald Trump wants to spend tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to throw himself a big fancy parade with tanks in the streets. And on one level, this is ridiculous, right? But he is doing this for a reason. This is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. He wants to project strength. He wants everybody to think that he is all powerful, that he rules the world. He doesn't. He doesn't. As we said on that website, look, real power is not in D.C. It's distributed all across the country. And what we're looking to do on No King's Day is to say, look, Donald Trump does not own the flag. He does not own patriotism. In fact, we can all show up in opposition to a king in this country. And this isn't about any individual organization. This is about all of us. Whether you are from the faith community, whether you're a veteran, whether you're an activist, whether you're a teacher, you can be part of this. As you mentioned, there are 100 events so far. This has been up for the weekend, available to register events. I would expect over 1,000. We saw 1,100 for May Day protests. We saw over 1,300 events all across the world for April 5th Hands Off. If you are watching this right now and you are thinking, well, I don't want a king in this country, good news, neither do we. And you can be part of this. Look up, see if you've got an event near you. If you don't, congratulations. You are going to be the organizer for an event in your community. We need them in rural communities. We need them in urban communities. We need them in red states and purple states and blue states. Ultimately, this comes down to all of us. We have got to do the work to show that, yes, this is a constitutional republic, and a constitutional republic has no kings.
Ezra, over the course of the first 100 days of Trump in office, I feel like what I saw as the effect of protests were sort of two things. First of all, because the protests weren't just one big protest one day in Washington or one big day in New York or something like that, but because the protests were constant and happening so frequently and happening in literally every state in the country, and I'd say over time in almost every town of any size, and some towns of no size. Because they happened in so many places, one of the effects was that a lot of Republican members of Congress and senators found themselves confronted by their own constituents about stuff that Trump was doing that they themselves, as elected Republicans, couldn't defend and couldn't explain, and felt like they had to ultimately say, okay, I side with my constituents on this. And that drove a lot of caving in Washington in terms of what Trump was trying to do. But then the other thing that I saw happen is that I think that large numbers of protests over time, happening all over the place, created a sort of culture in which it was shameful to capitulate. And the groups, whether they're law firms or billionaires or business interests or anybody else, or Republican electeds or anybody else, or even Democratic electeds who were thinking about sort of cozying up to Trump, looked at this footage and looked at what was going on in these communities and looked at these large protests and felt like, you know what those people are asking for is probably the right side of history, and I don't feel comfortable staying on the other side of that. I felt like it created a cultural dynamic in which it was embarrassing to be siding with Trump. That's what I've been seeing, just covering this stuff in order to tell people about the news over these past 100 days. I wanted to ask for your reaction to those observations and ask, as somebody who's been involved really right in the middle of this, if you feel like the impact has been something other than that.
Look, you are exactly right. What we are doing with mass protest, mass peaceful protest in communities red, blue, and purple around the country is not just showing up for the sake of showing up. We're showing up to send a message to everybody else who is looking to their left and looking to their right and trying to decide, what do I do? And as you said, this is law firms, this is universities, this is businesses. People are trying to understand, is this guy for real? Is he in power forever? Do I have to adjust to this new reality permanently? Or will there be a new day of accountability that follows the Trump administration? And by showing up en masse, repeatedly, month after month, week after week, day after day, in many cases, what we are doing is sending a very strong signal to those businesses, those universities, those law firms that, oh, I can't actually just cover myself today or next week because this guy's going to be out soon. He's an unpopular, lame duck president, and there is going to be a future post-Trump era, and I'm still going to be a law firm. I'm still going to be a business. I'm still going to be a university. I'm going to have to contend with my actions today. So the smart move stops being, I'm going to cover myself today, and it becomes, I've got to think about what comes next.
That's right. We all should be thinking about that all the time in terms of it, explaining ourselves to ourselves in the mirror and to future generations about what we did in this moment. Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Mr. Levin, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, more news ahead tonight. Stay with us.